In the 1930s, a Greek archaeologist, Spiridon Marinatos, began work on the island. He was to make a startling discovery. Studying the ruins on Crete, he found rooms partly filled with volcanic ash. Then he noticed that entire walls of buildings along the coast had been physically moved by as much as 200 feet. How did this happen? Were these signs of violent invasion or something more sinister?
Eventually, Spiridon Marinatos moved his dig to Santorini, an island not very far away from Crete. In fact, you can see it on a clear day from one to the other. The thing that he was looking for was a Minoan civilization, and he found it almost immediately, although it was under tons of volcanic debris. The city he found on Santorini was a Minoan city, and it's called Akrotiri. Actually, Akrotiri is the name of the Greek city close to the dig site, but it's called the Akrotiri archaeological site. You can walk into the archaeological site and walk around there, and the city itself is probably only maybe 3 or 5% excavated at this particular point. Of course, until it's 100% excavated, you can never be sure just exactly how big any particular ancient city might happen to be. But this one is complete with a roof over it, and there are sidewalks around. Marinatos worked here up until his death in 1974. As a matter of fact, in 72, I was going to be going here, but I couldn't make the trip. But in 74, he died right at the dig site, either from a massive coronary or perhaps a wall fell on him or something. The accounts are not particularly clear, but he's buried nearby. Marinatos popularized this particular dig by likening it to Atlantis. So what makes this particular site in Santorini similar to Plato's Atlantis? Well, for one thing, it's on an island in which there are concentric circles of water and land. The core of the volcano is, of course, in the center. There are two islands. One is the old volcano core, that's the smaller one, and the other one is the new volcano core. And it is surrounded by a caldera, a rim around the volcano, which is quite high and very impressive when you're at sea. From the rim of the volcano to the rim of the volcano on the other side is about 10 miles. The cliffs on the volcano rim are quite steep and quite tall, and they continue to be quite steep all the way down well below the water level.
Now just listen to what Plato has to say about his Atlantis.
There were circular belts of sea and land enclosing one another, some greater, some smaller.
Now, of course, that in itself doesn't prove anything. I mean, there could be loads of locations all around the world that match this description. But nonetheless, this account and that landscape are really remarkably similar.
This dramatic landscape draws thousands of tourists every year. But not all of them realise that they are actually sailing into the remnants of an enormous volcanic crater.
Santorini is remarkably similar to what Plato was describing, rings of land and water. Incidentally, Thera is the older name for the island, and that is the name that the Greeks still use. If you overlay Plato's description on top of the island, it looks quite similar. And then suddenly you realize that although there is a central island on both of them, there are two rings of land in Plato's description and only the outer caldera rim at Santorini. One other problem is that Plato's Atlantis is only about 3 miles across, whereas the Santorini caldera is 10 miles across, so that Plato's Atlantis is much, much smaller. Most cruise ships anchor in the caldera, and then they send out a small launch to the old port of the city. And then it's a very steep climb along that sidewalk you see in the center, that narrow road, in order to get up to where all the tourist facilities are located. Thera, the town that's up at the top, is basically just a collection of souvenir shops. There are a couple of ways to get to the top. Of course, you could walk, but you could also take a cable car up to the top. The problem, of course, with the cable car is that although it's very rapid and very convenient and relatively inexpensive, it only carries a few people at a time. You can conveniently get about 6 people into those cable cars, maybe only 4 if they're large people, and there are only 6 cable cars in each one of those trains of cable cars, and the result is that you can only get about 30 or 36 people up to the top at any one time, and it takes about 15 minutes round trip. You may have a number of cruise ships down in the caldera at any one time, and they could very well have as many as 12,000 people on board that want to get up to the top. The tourists have to get up to the top in the morning, and they all have to return to the ship at the end of the day at 4 o'clock. Now it's late in the day. It's after 4 p.m. when all the tourists have to be back to the cruise ships that they came from earlier in the day. And the result of that is these cable cars are virtually empty. I'm the only person in this train of cable cars that is going down at this particular time. But it's also a good time for me to be able to take whatever pictures I want. I can easily get into the front car, and I'm not bothering anybody else on the way down. Off to the left, of course, there's the city of Thera, which is named after the island and the volcano. And you can see that zigzag road just out of sight now that allows you to go up and down to the old port. The caldera, of course, is directly ahead of you, and you can see the other side of the rim, as well as how steep the slopes are here. The new volcano is directly ahead of us, and behind it is the old volcano, the smaller core. As your cable cars go down, another set meets you halfway coming up. They're not entirely empty. They're on the left again. You can see that little walkway that people take going up and down. For each step, you go up about 6 inches or so, and it's sloped, so it's actually a little bit more than that. The steps themselves, there's 600 of them, and it takes you 4 footsteps in order to cover one of those steps. They're rather large. We're coming down to the old port now, and the new ferries, the ferries don't come in here anymore, just the cruise ships. It's very picturesque this way. But because you can only get a handful of people in these cable cars at any one time, it means that a fair number of people have to find some other way up and probably down. And of course you can walk that distance, but the traditional way to get up and down is what they call a donkey ride. There are some drawbacks to the donkey rides. The animals leave a certain amount of urine and feces behind, and that attracts flies and such. And in addition, as they're moving up the walkway, they don't care much about those telephone poles there that you see. They're just as likely to hit you against them as they move up as anything else. As a matter of fact, I think that maybe they would like to scrape you off their back if they had a choice. I asked the guys that work there why they call these donkey rides, whereas these are actually mules. And the fellows that work there didn't know, but I suspect the answer is traditional. That is, in the past, maybe they actually did use donkeys, but the tourists were in fact a little too heavy for donkeys, and mules, of course, are much stronger and much more sure-footed than anything else that they could use. Long before I got to Santorini, I did some reading on the donkey rides. And a lot of the people were complaining about the donkey rides and how poorly the donkeys were taken care of and how badly they were treated. I took a look at them. They looked like they were quite healthy to me. They weren't treated any worse than any other livestock I've ever seen, I don't think. And I believe that everything is quite normal with these donkey rides. One of the things that makes mules ideal for this sort of thing is that mules, because their eyes are actually outside of their skull, can see all four of their feet at the same time, which makes them incredibly sure-footed. And in this case, with this low wall over there was absolutely no chance that anything was going to be tripped accidentally over that wall. At least, I can't imagine that happening. They use mules like this, or a little bit larger actually, for trips in the U.S. Grand Canyon, and the mules seem to do just fine.
Is that it?
On your way up from the sea level up to the top of the crater rim, there's plenty of opportunity to see those red and black and white stones, those blocks that were so prominent in Plato's description of Atlantis. It's these stones, plus the fact that you've got rings of land and water here, that brought it to Spiridon Marinatus' attention that this may very well be a substantial portion of the myth of Atlantis, if it isn't Atlantis itself. But the main thing to keep in mind is that this location, even though it wasn't on Crete, was an integral part of the Minoan civilization and the Minoan culture. And the things that we discovered at Knossos tend to be repeated here at Akrotiri.